So, thank you so much for coming to this very special event. This is just the show that I'm having in Sierra Arts Gallery, one of my favorite galleries in town. I remember when I first came to Reno, I visited this gallery a few times. The shows were quite interesting, and I was hoping that one day I will have a show here. And so it just happened. It happened, and I'm very grateful to Maria Partridge, the curator of this show, and to Val, who's I guess not here, and Natalie, for helping me with the whole thing, and for creating such a nice atmosphere. All the chairs, everything looks great, and I'm going to start to talk about how come I'm painting the way I am. What is it? I don't know if there are some artists among you, so I know that the ones who are artists have probably are more acquainted with abstract art. And if you guys have no idea what it is, I hope I'll be able to explain enough so you will have, after this event, you will have a connection with it that will give you some good information about the capacity of our consciousness. Some of you here, including me, we're doing a yoga teacher's training, and we're learning about the mysterious Kundalini rising experience, spiritual enlightenment, practices, yogic practices that help us to open chakras and to allow the energy to go all the way up to the top. I will be talking about that. Just wanted to make sure that you guys all know that I'm going to be talking about all kinds of things today. First of all, I'll start with my own personal story, how I became a painter. My parents were actors, and I was 100% sure that I was going to follow my parents' footsteps, and I was getting ready for it when I was little. Already, probably Mikey's age, I was watching my mother perform, and I was sure that this is what was going to happen. But it didn't happen, and it didn't happen because my mother didn't want me to become an actress, and I basically stayed home and drew and painted all the time. And eventually, by the time I was 14, I decided to devote my life to art. And as I was in high school, high school times is when we are very idealistic, and we have these great ideas about life and how we're going to help the world and how we're going to make a huge change. And so in my heart, I always wanted to find something about art that would give me more information about the world and life. I had no idea how it could happen, but I had a sense that art may have the answers. And through practicing art, I was hoping to get those answers. So the first thing I did was try to apply to art school in Warsaw. It was a very conservative school with a lot of classical training, and to get into it was extremely difficult. And for me, it was even more difficult because, as you may know or may not know, I grew up in Poland, And in the 70s, when I was trying to get to the art school, I think it was 75, that was the height of the communist regime. And so anybody who who didn't have a proletariat, that's working class background, didn't get the points. So I was missing a whole bunch of points because my background was, my parents were actors, so that didn't count as a hard-working class, right? So I didn't get the points the first time, and I didn't get into the art school. When I was going, there were so many other reasons for it. I had terrible allergies, and it just didn't happen the first time. When I was about to try to pass the exam the second time, there was a show of the students who just finished the 4 years of painting, and they had their own show. And I went in there and I saw what I could expect myself to go through, what kind of training I could go through. And there were 2 rooms. One room was with a professor who was teaching that group. He was a painter himself, and he was painting only cavalry, Polish cavalry during the First World War. So all of the paintings that he did was mostly of horses and men on horses. And so imagine the whole room with all the students, maybe 12 different paintings that were the final work of the student, were all horses, and some of them were people on those horses. So I saw that, I'm like, wow, I don't know, I'm not really interested in just painting horses or a guy sitting on a horse. So I went to the other room, and the other room was the professor who was teaching there. He was a conceptual artist, and he was actually quite known in Europe. Conceptual artists who painted only dots. Okay, so there were just dots, and I didn't have much of. I knew a little bit about history of art. I didn't know much about conceptual art, classical art. Well, we know what it is: representative, realistic, and so on. But then, okay, so the whole room is full of paintings, and each painting is of dots. All these kids that were studying with that professor were painting exactly like he was. And that was a terrible disappointment for me. I thought, I just don't fit in there. I don't want to paint like anyone else at all. So this was one of the reasons why I decided to leave Poland and just go wild into the wild world. I was 19, and I kept on painting. I just kept on painting for all these years, wherever I could, however I could. My motto in life was to have time and place to do my work. That was all I asked for. So at first, I was painting some murals, I was painting realistic stuff, I was painting stuff that was kind of like abstract expressionism, if you know what that is, like high energy paintings that were sort of abstract, but not really. You could see figures in there. And then in, I think it was 1980, I met a group of German artists who were kind of my age, a little older, who were working mainly in Cologne in Germany, and they created a group called Neue Wilden, which means new wilds. And that was the first time I actually had contact with artists who, some of them, many of them completed art school in Western Europe, and the wave was really powerful. It was called postmodernism, and the type of work that I did, I was very influenced by them, and type of work they did was something that's called neo-expressionism. So if you see here, I'm going to put up some of the paintings that I did at that time. It was a very strong criticism of society, and so I had big shows with this type of work in Amsterdam, where I lived at the time. Cologne and Amsterdam are not too far away. So this was when I was probably 1980, me in my early 20s. I was working like this. So this is something that's, we were working, we had big studios. I worked together with other artists in huge, huge lofts. And we were painting on big sheets, like just cotton sheets, and we were spraying, and the idea was to make one painting a day. So I had a lot of paintings, and I don't have all of them. I don't even have pictures of all of them, but I was working a lot. This was something I started in Paris, actually, when I lived in Paris. It's kind of small because I don't even have a big picture of this one. But this is what I did in the 80s, in the early 80s, until I got tired of being a social critic, and I wanted to do something that felt deeper. And that's when I started to work on other paintings that were just my own stuff, not anymore influenced by anybody, but something that I myself called a series of paintings that I call deep paintings. These are, okay, so let me put this one up. This is also really small, I'm afraid. This is a large painting. These are all as large as this one, all of these. Some maybe a little smaller. This is humongous. This one is actually in collection of a royal collection in Den Haag. The painting was bought from the show, and it's bigger than this. This one is about the same size. I just wanted to show you quickly what other styles I worked in, and I had probably 20 paintings that were kind of, can you see here okay? I can move this. Oh, sorry. You see okay here? Maybe I can bring it a little closer. Oh. Like that. Yeah, okay. So by the time I came to United States in 1986, I was done with the deep paintings, and I kind of went back a little bit to the social criticism of postmodern style, which was a little bit surrealist, if you know what I mean. There were very figurative elements in there, and I ended up in LA in 1987. I had a show before on the East Coast, because when I first moved to United States, I lived in Norfolk, Virginia, and I had a show somewhere there in Portsmouth, I believe, of very small paintings that was, as I said, going back to a little bit of a postmodern view of society. But by the time by the time I ended up in Los Angeles, I was still thinking about painting. I wasn't sure if I even was going to paint. I didn't have a studio, and it was 1990. 8 when I started to write titles of short poems or longer poems. And then I had like, it took over maybe within half a year, I had 49 different titles of different poems. And then I got my studio. So I had a studio and I could start painting, and I wasn't sure whether I still would do just writing or I would start painting. And I started painting, and I picked some of those titles. I was living in between downtown and Hollywood in Los Angeles. It was all new world to me, and I was examining it carefully. And I had, I hope you can see this one well, because this is one of my favorite paintings from that time. Those titles were playful. I just wanted to entertain myself. So this one will give you an idea. Once I disclose the title of it, it may give you an idea how entertaining I want it to be. This painting, it's a small acrylic painting. It's titled A Thought Substitute. So this is what I was doing at that time. After a while, I probably had 9 paintings that were equally humorous. I came upon a title that was one of the titles of my poems, and I decided to paint it. And that was Understanding Understatement. By the way, there is information about that also on the wall there. If you would like to read it later, it describes exactly what happened, because I had this title, Understanding Understatement. And you know, I painted for 17 years by then. I painted for 17 years straight. I had many shows in Europe, and I didn't stop painting. I thought I was going to maybe go into acting. I was in Hollywood, you know, just I had all these ideas. And then I had that title, Understanding Understatement, and I was trying to figure out how could it look like, right? How could Understanding Understatement look like? And I came up with an idea that a decision, that understanding comes from a decision, right? You decide that you understand something. And I put a straight line on the canvas. And then I put another straight line that symbolized another idea, another understanding of something. And all these lines were straight. And they were crossing in under all different angles. And then I thought, well, there is a decision, and then there is an emotional component to it. And I decided to use shading as something that would symbolize to me emotions. And shading was coming from those lines. And so within some time, I had this. And this is where the magic comes in. I kept on working on this. This painting is that big. It's a small acrylic painting. I kept on working on it and staring at it. And as you know, if you paint for many years, your eyes are really, you have really good vision. It's just a matter of really looking and looking and looking. It's a practice. It's a practice of visual understanding. So I'm staring at this and trying to figure out what to do to make it better, of course, and looking. And now, Mikey, for a moment, just give me a minute, okay? Give me 1 minute. I have to explain something. So, as I was looking at this painting and working on it, suddenly something happened. To describe it well, I'd have to say that suddenly what I was looking at completely took over my work, my painting, my title, my own knowledge about the work, everything I knew about art up until that moment. It all just was swallowed instantly by something that was superimposed on top of what I already saw on my painting. I just found myself in another dimension. And I was there. So I'm looking at this painting, and then I realized that I'm in another world. And in that world, the world is so bright, and my mind was just completely absorbed in it. I realized that what I was looking at was something that had to do with creation of concepts that were there in abstract form. It's really impossible to describe it. I'm trying my best, and I've tried my best for years to describe it, but it's not describable. And this is why I started painting that way. And there is a lot of information that we can find about, for example, tetrahedrons and Merkabahs. If you know about that, I read much later that certain angles, if we look at a combination of certain angles, I don't even know what these angles are supposed to be. Maybe some of you know. Then the combination of those angles, especially two tetrahedrons on top of each other, create what's called Merkabah, which is an old sacred symbol, which if we look at, we supposedly can get into another dimension. And that has been known for thousands of years. Merkabah it comes from Torah, from Jewish religion. So maybe that's what happened, that when I was looking at that painting, it actually allowed me to enter into that dimension. It was such an enlightening and such a powerful vision that nothing else mattered anymore to me. I didn't want to do anything else. I just wanted to keep on working on that, keep on finding that dimension in my paintings again. Because the information in there, it's like the information is coded. That's what I understood when I for the first time saw it happen. I was there, and I realized that there is a lot of information coded in those shapes, that they're moving too. It's not that it wasn't a static vision. So you can say that it was a vision but it embodied so much of thought and so much of inspiration, so much of light, so much power was in it that it was definitely worth it for me to explore it and keep on searching in there. And so I started. I worked for 3.5 to 4 years just on paintings like this. Some of the paintings here, like that colorful one over there, like the one over here, and then there is one, that one here, and the one in the back as well. Those are older. Some of them are from '89, and some of them are from early '90s. So I kept on working in that vein and didn't want to go back to anything else. Just that was all I was doing. Because I had personal situation, my family situation, I couldn't be with my daughter, and I was not doing financially very well because I didn't really know how to sell my work at all. I grew up in a family of actors, and no one sold anything in my family. I had no clue what to do. So I was getting depressed in spite of the fact that I was very inspired by my work. I was getting depressed. And after some time, so now we are already in 1992, early that year, I had shows of these paintings in Ireland, a couple of group shows in Los Angeles, and there was quite a bit of interest, but the sales were not coming, which was important to me because I had an idea that if I can earn a good living through my artwork, I'll be able to be with my daughter, who lived in Poland at that time. She still lives in Poland. So I got very depressed, and then one day I knew I was suicidal and I was going to commit suicide. And that's when another experience happened. And this is why I have this here. And there is a connection. I had an experience of a full spontaneous Kundalini rising that I didn't know what it was when it was happening. I never heard the word Kundalini, and I never I didn't believe in chakras, and I didn't really have, I wasn't into getting spiritual tuition in any way. I just did my own thing. I believed that the work I was doing, it was really pulling me in. I was very interested in it, and it gave me a lot of power and it gave me a lot of understanding about a variety of things, and that was great. But at the same time, I was getting more depressed because of whatever my personal situation. And at the time when I was ready to commit suicide, and that experience happened, I was able to, how to say it, so it makes sense to you, because I understand that not everyone is aware what Kundalini rising is, and I wasn't aware of it either. It started with me trying to work on my emotion, which was a violent desire to destroy myself right then and there, and going to the store to purchase razor blades. And I was fighting with that emotion, and the only way I could fight with it was to see through it, to see what that emotion was, regardless of the story that was attached to it, regardless of what I was thinking, why it all happened, and all the circumstances. I just looked through that emotion, and I had to had to confront it completely. And when I confronted it completely, I found myself in a very interesting space. It was the space of emptiness. And what I realized is that for years when I was painting, I used the same practice. The practice of painting no matter what. No matter what kind of mood I was in, no matter how depressed I was, no matter how I felt, I was able to, I learned to, it didn't come easily, but I learned to kind of step out of that emotion and just keep on painting. No matter what it was, I just kept on painting, and that painting was a meditative state. So, you know, we already know by now that painting is therapeutic, right? Art is therapeutic, so that's why I was naturally, organically drawn to it as well, to deal with my depression. So once I found myself in that space of emptiness, I couldn't paint at that time when I was just about to commit suicide. I couldn't paint. I was not painting. It was not a situation where I could paint. There is this description of it in my book, how it all was, the description of that whole process. So I think I have the description of the abstract dimension in my book too, and the description of how the process started, that organic, natural process of Kundalini rising that I didn't know anything about. But I knew that I found myself in the space of emptiness, and in that space there was nothing. All I could do was to focus on my breathing. So I kept on breathing, and then I realized that after a while my emotions were not bothering me anymore, but my mind was still going on that I have to commit suicide, and that's the only way I can get through this is to actually end my life, on and on and on. And I couldn't figure out how to get out of that. I could not make my mind find a good solution. So I had to agree, and I agreed to commit suicide. I agreed to what my mind was telling me. And when I did that, I had my eyes closed, and then I was ready to get up and go get those razor blades when I opened my eyes, and I saw something that scared me to death. Almost. Not exactly to death, but I was very close. Because there was the whole thing was happening in the bathroom, and I could see, I was in the bathtub. There was no water in there, but I could see that on the background of the white tub, there was a rope of rainbow light flowing. And so you can imagine that I was very somber at that time. I had no rainbows in my imagination, yet it was there and it was real. And because it was real, I got very scared of it, and I wanted to jump, to run away from it. And I made a huge step to get out of the tub when I realized that it was a part of me. So that was the beginning, the visible beginning, because the experience started as soon as I made an effort to, well, actually it started as soon as I kind of relinquished my life. I just had those suicidal thoughts, and I stepped away from the material world. And then I was all done very intuitively. I didn't know, just like the practice I did on emotions and paintings was all intuitive work. I never read about it before. It was just something that worked for me. So if you are an artist, you also know that This is how we do it, right? We work with emotions, and we are always dealing with some kind of emotional thing, and we either put it into our work. And I could see sometimes, I could see images coming to me from my past that had some kind of emotional content that I could remember. And as I was focusing on just painting, I could feel the energy going through my hand on the brush, going into the painting. I could feel that. So there is a lot that we can see, but it's there. There is a lot of different energies. And when finally I decided to conquer my fear and not run away from that rainbow light screaming, I sat down, and the whole experience happened. And I won't be able to describe it in details, because what we're going to talk about is the sixth dimension. The first one is the material world, and this is something that I had time to think over, and I had time to, because my experience happened in 1992, I had time to contemplate, and I took time to really meditate and contemplate what actually happened. I had time to look into information about the phenomena of Kundalini rising and spiritual enlightenment in books. It was before internet, so it wasn't as already there right in front of you, whatever you click on. But I took some time to look in available books in libraries. I bought some books, and I was able to see that what happened to me spontaneously was that my consciousness was able to go through each of the chakras, but I didn't think of them as chakras. What was happening was that as soon as I sat down, as I said, my emotions were at that time sort of, I can say conquered, but they were resolved. I was in that space of emptiness where there is no positive or negative emotion. It is a space that spiritual teachers for thousands of years have been talking about, and that's one of the steps, one of the first steps for Kundalini to rise, because if we have emotions stuck in this area, in the second chakra, which from day to day, on daily basis we do. If we don't work on them, they'll be compiling, and then together with the thoughts, which is the third chakra, we'll have the personality that will be rigid. We can't really do that much with it. We can try to, but the emotions come back, and they come back in the form of mental structure that we totally believe in. So I'm already talking now from the viewpoint of somebody who's thought it over for a long time, thought about it. But as I was there in Los Angeles, in that mansion where I lived, in that bathtub, I knew that the experience started when I saw the rainbow light. But there were things that happened right after that, when I was already sitting and allowing the experience to happen, where I was able to, and I just say it in a few sentences, I was able to follow each of my thoughts from the time when I started thinking as a little child. And it sounds impossible, right? But it's actually something that our mind is able to do. And it wasn't just me, it's not just me. Our minds are amazing. Our minds are perfect computers that can analyze everything and follow each thought. We can follow our thoughts. And I was able to follow all of my thoughts, and all of my thoughts came to present time, not all together, but little by little, one by one. And as they came to present time, I was free from thoughts. When I was free from thoughts, I also experienced this shell of mud that was covering me suddenly disintegrating and falling off me. And I was free from all of that. That was my personality, the labels that we receive, that we give ourselves. I am this and I am that. I was not anymore an artist or whatever I thought of myself. I was free from any of that. And so that's just the third chakra, which to me, as I was experiencing the whole process, it was looking at dimensions. So the first dimension is material. The second dimension is emotional. The third one is mental. The fourth is heart. And there is magic on every point of transcendence. Moment when our consciousness moves from one dimension to another, it's magical. And it's magical all along, but just to get, here you are in the place of just breathing and realizing that you're just breathing and all there is your breath and there is no emotional charge. This is losing all of your thoughts and not having to deal with them anymore. So they're not there. You can figure anything out. You realize that your mind can figure anything out and you're not afraid to have a problem because you know you can solve it. Because the mind can do it. The mind goes from A to B to C to D. The mind is linear and logical. The free mind that we can have if we lose all the thoughts, because if we still have all those thoughts, then it's not necessarily logical, because we have the emotions and we have the thoughts and it's all mixed up together and it's not always logical at all. But the free mind is logical and linear and can get perfect results through thinking. But when you come to the fourth chakra, the fourth dimension is love. And that's when what Jesus Christ was teaching about love, he was because he received it. He received it just like it happened to me, that I received it. And I describe it in my book, step by step, how it happened. But what was the effect of that I received it? I realized that love is there all the time, and that each of us is loved madly, just the way we want to be loved, exactly. There is nothing needed from the outside world. We are all loved, just like we dream of being loved. And the presence that bestows that love on us, call it God, call it Spirit, call it anything you want, there is a presence that's always there. Love is always there. It knows everything about you. It knows all of your problems. It knows all of your feelings. It knows everything about you. So that's this dimension of love. Then the fifth one, that happened when I was happily sitting there, blown away, but realizing that so many people don't know that they're loved. They live unfulfilled. They're looking for another person out there, and it's so hard to find love in another person sometimes, right? And so looking for love outside is a tricky thing. We still do it. It's okay. But the point is that the truth of love is that it's always there, always there. There's no moment when it's not. Because each of these dimensions works differently. We have time in the third dimension, but in the fourth dimension, it's just eternal. It's always there. There is no love before and love after. It's always there. And then the fifth dimension happened, I entered that through sound. I suddenly started to hear this incredible sound all around me, and I thought that someone was playing music in the house. And I was wondering, how come somebody could be playing such incredible music so loud at 2:30 p.m. I knew exactly where I was and what was going on. I wasn't in any. It's a very clear state of mind. The whole experience is very clear. It's not at all fuzzy or. And I didn't take any drugs, or didn't smoke cigarettes, didn't smoke anything, no alcohol, nothing for years and years and years always. So it just happened naturally. And it started with music, and I was listening to this incredible music, and the light was blue all around, and then these figures came, and the figures were they were in robes, and they were appearing in front of me, scrolling down, and each of them was looking at me and acknowledging me. I realized they were acknowledging me where I was, what was happening. So that's the dimension of connection, sound and connection, exchange of energy. This is where psychic people come in when they can channel other beings, or at all being aware of other beings being out there, and there is a communication. So all that has to do with the fifth dimension is Akashic Records, which you might have heard about, which is a recording of everything that has ever happened, that's happening now, and it will happen. Can we fathom that? In our mind, this mind doesn't get it. It just knows, maybe has the information like I have, like you have too, that there is a recording of all that's going on, and we can access it through what's called Akashic Records. And so there is, the rituals and mantras and singing, anything that has to do with music and sound has to do with that exchange of energy. But it's also relationships. It's also how we talk to each other. And if the energy from this Kundalini, which is the individual unit of consciousness, if that energy is able to open up the chakras up to here, then this one is already open too. And so the communication happens through love already. Versus when the communication happens through here and love is not taken under account as an actual real thing, as a dimension that's always there, then it's not as pleasant. It's not as understandable, not as good. People don't get along as well. But if we have all these channels, all these chakras open and reach here, then we can communicate with others, understanding that we are loved and we feel that love, and we can help others to find themselves in that state as well through communicating. Now let's go to the sixth chakra, and this is, it's almost 7, so I have a little time to talk about the sixth one, because this is where I realized my experience happened in 1988 when I was painting Understanding Understatement. The sixth dimension has a lot of layers. One of them, and that's the one higher up towards the top of the sixth chakra, is where those concepts are. And it's not just me that was able to see through that. But there were other artists, and the abstraction itself started as a movement that had spiritual charge to it. In 1906, Hilma van Afklimt, Swedish painter, who actually painted a lot of beautiful landscapes, but when she was 14, her sister passed away. Hilma was born in mid-1800s, and when her sister passed away, she was very, very upset about it, and for years tried to contact her sister. And her paintings, her abstract work, started with that attempt to communicate with other beings in another dimension. And you may have heard of her, but this woman she started the abstract painting, completely abstract work. This is one of the retrospectives, quite recent. She was not really known for many years. She was little known, but now she is considered as the pioneer of abstraction. These are really big paintings, and all of her artwork has to do with connecting with other spirits in other dimensions. Here we have 1911, a few years later, Piet Mondrian, a Dutch artist who you may have heard about, who started to work on this tree. He was very interested and studied, I don't know if you have heard of Madame Blavatsky, a theosophic studies also about different dimensions, about psychic powers, about all that's so ephemeral and so difficult to talk about. And I just am so happy that I was able to, through this experience, clear up a lot of misunderstandings and confusions about what's actually going on when we are beyond this logical, linear thinking and experience life through our consciousness, which is so much beyond the mind. So other artists already at the beginning of the 20th century were aware that there is a spiritual essence to everything that is. And so this is how Piet Mondrian was working on this tree and finally made it a completely abstract thing. And I think this is actually this way. So there is more of his work that you may know, that's kind of squares, white and red and blue with lines. That's what he did most of his life. He just was studying this kind of power of abstraction, power of the essence that's beyond how we see the world, beyond the realistic view, but something that has what another artist called the feeling. Maybe it should be called a feeling, but this was 1915 when another artist, Kazimir Malevich, painted this black square on a white background. And rightfully so, he thought of it to be, this is another composition of his from the same time, very powerful work that he did. He was a pioneer of abstraction as well. I don't think he knew about Hilma van Clymf because she was virtually unknown at that time. But Malevich studied in Germany and knew about Cubism. And here is what I didn't bring any examples of Cubist work, but I wanted to mention that to some of you, my work could resemble Cubist compositions. And although it is, you can call it a coincidence, at the same time, it's not really coincidence. I'm just simply continuing the tradition of modernism, because modernism began with those abstract artists. That's the beginning of modernism, where photography was so powerful and you could photograph anything, and there was a big question, where is painting going? Where is the fine art in there? How to express this? What's the essence of artistic expression? It doesn't have to be a painting of a person or a table or a horse. It just can be something different. It happened that I actually had this understatement. I composed it that way, and it became Cubist in a way. But the way the Cubists got to their place, how they created Cubism, was different. Georges Braque, a French, actually was he French or Spanish? I think he was Spanish living in Paris. Georges Braque and Pablo Picasso, who stole Cubism from Georges Braque, they decided that they are going to paint an object from many angles, many sides at once. So if you know, when you look at the mountain like this, it's going to look like that way. If you come closer, if you look from a side, it's going to look completely different. So Cubism used the elements of different angles and created compositions that had to do with observing something simultaneously from different directions. So Cubism is taken from still observation of the outside world. My work has to do with not looking outside, but rather looking inside, and finding ways of expressing certain concepts on two-dimensional space. So that's the difference, but there is no doubt that my work continues modernist effort to create work that embodies essence of some kind of energy that's otherwise that doesn't have to be described through a realistic image. So that's about Cubism, and these are the artists that painted that foremost modernist great artists. There was an artist, there was a German artist who ended up living his life in India and studying Buddhism, and eventually I think he ended his life in California, but this is his work. That his name was Ernst Hoffmann, and he went by Lama Anagarika Govinda. He lived in India for many years, and he was very, very involved in meditation. And he also painted abstractions that, as you can see, are simple, but that has to do also with the sixth dimension. Concepts and abstract ideas that are not representational. That is, it's a power of a concept. Agnes Martin, who more of a modern artist, who I think she passed away in 2006 or 4. So she did a lot of work that is also very meditative. She talked about Buddhist ideas, and talked about no ideas at all. So she was reaching that place here, because up until here, our consciousness is busy with forms. And these forms at first are very realistic. In here, we see life as it is. That's the reality that we see. To an extent, we are all seeing it alike, right? Colors and so on, it's very similar. Once it comes to here, this is something that some of the blue color, for example, is characteristic to visions of angels, archangels, and different spirits. It's often, if you see those images, they're often on a blue background, dark blue. The same with this, there is a dark blue background, almost black, to the vision that I had when my consciousness came to this place, to the sixth dimension. So the abstraction is actually, as I said, the top of the sixth dimension. At the beginning, there is a vision. So we know many artists who are focusing on that, on a vision. Whether it's executed in a figurative or half abstract way or totally abstract way, it still has to do with a vision. And many artists, that's how they work, right? They have a vision. And that's the sixth dimension. This is our sixth chakra, the third eye working. So the whole, more or less a conclusion that I wanted to emphasize on for this meeting today is that the sixth dimension is something that has to do with vision and visual thinking. Art has to do with that, but there are other ways that sixth dimension is used by us, and that's psychic sciences like astrology, numerology, sacred geometry, sacred symbols, religious symbols, and gods and deities are as well here in that all the archetypes. Gods are archetypes, and this is where sixth dimension is. We live with it almost on daily basis, not even knowing that that's what it is, because our mind always wants to flatten everything and bring it to all logical, and as long as it's not logical, mind doesn't want to believe in it or doubt it, or it doesn't want to accept it. And science is here, so it doesn't necessarily want to accept. I just heard a scientist, a very known scientist, English guy, very nice, friendly guy, who said, "Don't worry about ghosts because they don't exist." Well, that's what science says. But how many people have experienced ghosts? Many, right? I mean, this is something that many of us experienced. I've experienced it. I don't see it often, but just a week ago, I gave a talk in Reno Psychic Institute about my encounters with the spirits on the ridge, with spirits of Washoe Indians who gave me some information. So it's there. Spirits are there, other beings are there. Science doesn't acknowledge it because they have no way of figuring it out, because these dimensions don't operate with the same principles as the mind, as our third chakra does. So in that sixth chakra, all that has to do with creation of concepts. And those concepts at first are in that conceptual abstract form, and eventually some of them become more of dense reality. That's the process. It comes from up there and becomes first an concept, and then some of these concepts realize. This is why visualization works. This is why what we think, whether we want to think it or not, don't want to think it, what we think can become true, because we are powerful agents of consciousness. We are consciousness, and with the subtle body that we possess, we can create reality. So at this level where art is a form of creation, and that creation is just like the creation we observe in nature. It's not any different. Artist creates reality in a way. Only that reality is specific to present consciousness of the artist. And all of nature, we are equally creators of it, which becomes clear only when you leave the sixth dimension and enter the seventh. And this is a difficult thing for many of us to understand, because the seventh dimension is where we use a different mind. This is not the third chakra mind. This is the meditative mind, the witnessing, observing, and discerning mind. It's not the mind that looks at something and tries to get it, or figures out how to get from there to there, or speculates on different options. This is the mind that just there observes and doesn't do anything about it, but discerns, and that's how we develop the seventh chakra. If the seventh chakra is not developed, and Kundalini rises and it gets stuck here, then we can become religious fanatics because gods are there ready to grab us. They're there. Their archetypes are there, and the less if you were able to get through to here, then the power of this dimension is tremendous. And it's only if we are able to go further up to the seventh, and in fact the energy that we have exits through the head, through the crown chakra. That's when we unite in full consciousness with all there is, and we realize that reality as we live now, it seems so solid, right? We made time when we're getting together, you came here at this and this time, and on and on and on, and this place and address and refreshments and everything is real, right? But this reality is being created at every moment anew. At every moment, it's all new. This is where our consciousness is able to free itself from this paradigm of the first 3 dimensions. Going up here, we realize that everything is being created anew. That's how powerful the consciousness is.